can see that we've got Mahzor Lev Shalem in the background. Why is this service different from other services? And what I'm hoping to do tonight is to, answer that question. Like what, our services on the high holidays follow the exact same structure as every service every single day of the year. We've got a morning service, we've got an afternoon service, an evening service. There's the Shema with its blessings, there's the Amidah, there's a Torah service, there's Musaf, right? These are all parts of the service which are familiar to us, right? They're all the parts that make up Shabbat. And yet there's a lot of things in those, in the Mahzor that are unique and that are unique to the high holidays. We're gonna focus exclusively on Rosh Hashanah, although some of the prayers that we're gonna look at for Rosh Hashanah also appear in the liturgy for Yom Kippur as well. The Mahzor that we have today is an anthology, right? An anthology is a collection of material from lots of different sources that are brought together and organized in some fashion. And then by bringing them together, the anthologizer creates a new work that is now made up of all of these different sources that are now kind of in communication with each other, and they tell a story in a certain way. Our Mahzor is an anthology with material that has been comprised for 2,000 years and more. And as we're going to see, it really has. We've seen additions to our Mahzor throughout, like in every single period over the last 2,000 years. It represents many different traditions of Jews from many different parts of the world. We have elements of the Mahzor from Babylonia, from the land of Israel, from Europe, from Northern Africa. We have, and there's elements of this Mahzor that are from the United States. And in fact, we have the editors of this Mahzor, the anthologizers. They are rabbis and cantors from the conservative movement that are, from the United States and probably some other countries. And so think of it as the latest iteration of a tradition that's been going back for thousands of years. Some of the elements in the Mahzor go all the way back to the Second Temple time. And now, if you were to hold up a Sephardi Mahzor and an Ashkenazi Mahzor, you would find that they were different. They include different prayers. By the way, that's true for our daily services. That's true for our Shabbat services. There are differences between these different traditions. And it's not just Ashkenazi and Sephardi. There are other traditions of Jews that are neither of those. You may have heard of the Oriental traditions, or Edot HaMizrach, which is the communities of the East. Think of Jews from Arabic-speaking lands. Those traditions are very similar to the Sephardi traditions. If you were to look at Hasidic traditions, there's going to be some differences. There are also a group of Jews that go back to that are from the Roman ritual, right? Specifically from Rome. Rome has its own tradition. There's a group of Jews called the Romaniot Jews, which are from northern Greece. And these are not Sephardi Jews, right? They have their own traditions there, and so their Mahzor is going to look a little bit different. Now, for those of you who've been joining our Sidur class, I want to mention something to keep in mind that we've talked about in that class as well, which is that the earliest composition, the earliest anthology of prayers that we have into a single book, a single piece of writing, dates to the 9th century of the Common Era. Before that, there was no such thing as an anthology of prayers. So there was no Mahzor. Now, it existed in kind of a meta form, right? So there were certainly prayers and organized into a particular way that would have to be, recited, performed even on the high holidays, but there was no place that it was written down. So now from the 9th century on, everything had to be handwritten until the invention of the printing press, which meant that Mahzor was very rare, very expensive. Maybe there was one in a community that got passed down as the possession of the community. Maybe a very wealthy family might have something that they commissioned or bought that they passed down, but it was just not accessible to most Jews. So think about what the experience would have been of most Jews on Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Kippur, not to mention on any day of the week, any week of the year, which is that they don't have a text in front of them, which means they either have to have all of this stuff memorized, or more likely, they have to rely on somebody else who does have it memorized, or who has access to a book, an anthology of prayers that they could use for their services. The first printed Mahzor was printed in Italy in Soncino, Italy. In 1485, it was one of the first Hebrew books to be printed. It was part of a 2-volume printing. The first volume was like Shabbat and festivals, and the second volume was included material for the holidays, and it reflected the Minhag Roma, right? The custom of the Roman Jews. It was neither Sephardi nor Ashkenazi. Most copies of it were destroyed by the Inquisition, by the censors of the Inquisition, but it was then 30 or 40 years ago, it was reprinted, and it was and so that began a tradition of printing Mahzorim, and every time it was done, somebody, an editor, had to make decisions about what was going to be included. So, and just like in this Mahzor, right, the editors would collect material from lots of different places. They would look at handwritten manuscripts. They would look at printed material, and sometimes they might have the same prayer appearing in 2 different places with some differences. They would have to make decisions, educated guesses about which is the more correct version of this prayer. And so that's what the editors had to do. And by the way, this Mahzor includes material from handwritten manuscripts. We have a lot of material that was basically not considered to be good enough for High Holiday liturgy, that was thrown away and ended up in the Cairo Geniza. And so this Mahzor has actually rescued some fragments of prayers from the Cairo Geniza and put them back into our liturgy by including them in this anthology. This is not a strictly Ashkenazi or Sephardi Mahzor. It includes elements from lots of different traditions. And part of the idea is that the editors felt that we needed something that was going to reflect American Judaism, which is really a melting pot of Jews from lots of different parts of the world. And therefore our prayer services should reflect that. All right, so just keep in mind that if you're ever feeling lost in services and you're not sure you can't keep up, you don't quite understand anything, Jews have been feeling exactly the same way for the last 2,000 years. So you're not alone. And some of the complaints that people have today about High Holiday services are nothing new. People have been complaining about the same things for all time. So let's start by talking about some words that appear a lot in the Mahzor. And first, let's actually look at the word Mahzor itself. The word Mahzor means a cycle. Chazar is to return, right? So a Mahzor is something that represents something that we come back to on a regular basis, right? So a Mahzor is a liturgy. It's a book of prayers for something that happens on a periodic basis. And so in Sephardi tradition, the word Mahzor could refer actually to a Siddur, a prayer book that includes prayers for weekdays, Shabbat, the festivals, and the high holidays. The word Mahzor could refer to any of those things. In the Ashkenazi liturgy, a Siddur is for weekdays and Shabbat, and the word Mahzor would refer to a special prayer book specifically for one of the holidays. So you could have a Mahzor for Rosh Hashanah, a Mahzor for Yom Kippur, a Mahzor for Sukkot and Pesach and Shavuot. And these things are all printed, and they include all the material that you would need to participate in the services for one of those holidays. So that's the word Mahzor. Now, in this Mahzor, we're going to find a lot of words and themes that are going to recur. So let's look at them. So one, Rachamim, mercy, right? Rechem is actually also the word for womb. So it's a very maternal type of word. And so during the high holidays, we talk about wanting to push God up to the throne of mercy, to have mercy and compassion on us. We're going to see Deen, kind of the counter to mercy. Deen means law, right? So we want to move God from the throne of judgment, of law, up to the throne of mercy. Melech, king, right? You know, Rosh Hashanah is the celebration of the creation of the world. God is king and creator. And so this idea of kingship becomes a very important concept. Zecher, meaning remembrance, or zikaron, yizkor, all of these words are related to each other. Shofar, we know what a shofar is, but it's going to appear as a word and a theme in our liturgy as well. The word katav, or lichtov, which is to write. That's very important. What are we talking about writing? We're talking about writing in a book, in a sefer. And which book? Well, there's a lot of books that we talk about, but probably the main one, the one we're most familiar with, is the Sefer Chaim, right? It's the book of life, right? Maybe be inscribed in the book of life, or written in the book of life. Tzedek is another word that's going to come up. Tzedek or tzedakah. Tzedek means justice or righteousness. Tzedakah can be related to that. Sometimes it actually means charity, right? We're giving money, right? That actually appears in the liturgy in some significant places. And then finally, related to some of these words as well, chesed, which is a word for love, and it's a particular kind of love, meaning covenantal love, right? So this is, God's love of the Jewish people as the people of the covenant, and what God does as a lover of the Jewish people, and also what we do as expressions of love for God. So the term chesed is a word that captures that. This is different than what we would think of as emotional love, right? This is much more, a sense of the things we do as expressions of us being in a loving covenantal relationship. And so as we look at prayers tonight, we're going to see all of these words coming up in various forms. They're conjugated in lots of different ways. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are certainly some of the major words. Anybody have a word that they can think of that's not on this list that you think you recall hearing or seeing in the Mahzor? Feel free to unmute yourself if you have anything you'd like to add. Okay, all right, well, we can move on. All right, we're going to start by looking at the Shacharit Amidah. Prior to this point in our Mahzor, we've got Psukei de Zimra, kind of our opening warm-ups. That's identical as it is on Shabbat or on any other festival. We're going to get to Shacharit. The version of Shacharit in this Mahzor is almost identical to what we do on a festival. So we're not going to spend time. There's just a couple of lines. There are traditions in fuller Mahzorim that have some additional prayers, but they don't appear in this Mahzor. And what I want to focus on is just prayers that first of all, that appear in this Mahzor and that we're going to be using this year. We're not going to be doing everything that appears in the Mahzor for a couple of reasons. One, we're not gathered in person together for a minyan, and so there's some things we just can't do. Two, we have a limited patience on Zoom. So where possible, we have removed things from the service. And as we're going to see, much of what's in the Mahzor is not mandatory, right? There's very little that is actually mandatory based on the framework that the rabbis came up with in the Talmud. So most of what we do that we consider special for the holidays is bonus. So, but we're going to make sure that we get done all of the mandatory stuff. And by the way, that's been a major impetus for why we're doing an in-person shofar service, is because that's one of the central mitzvot of the holiday that you've got to hear in person, right? You can't do it, over Zoom. It doesn't count. You're not hearing the shofar, right? So, all right. So we're going to talk about the Shacharit Amidah, and it begins in the Mahzor on page 81. Okay, so what I want to look at first is a collection of 5 additions to the Amidah that appear beginning on Rosh Hashanah and that are recited every day for the next 10 days through Yom Kippur. So there's 5 short additions or slight or subtle modifications that we're familiar with, because we tend to sing them during services, and they're done in between as well. So this is all right. So let's look at the 5. All right. So here's the first one. This is on page 82. If you look at the top of the page, it says Zochreinu l'chaim. Already we've got 2 of our words. Zochreinu is remember us. L'chaim is for life. And what's the next word? Melech, king, right? 3 words, right? Just boom, just like that. Now this is not expressing complicated ideas, right? But it expresses some of the fundamental themes of the day. Remember us for life, sovereign, so they've gone for the gender neutral term. Melech means king, and for sure whoever wrote this was thinking king when they wrote Melech. So I want to be both accurate in terms of understanding what this word means, but also recognizing that we can, our understanding of what these ideas represent can change and does change over time. And we're living at a time where we're, let's say, much more comfortable with seeing God as not being gendered. And so often translations will reflect that. So here we have sovereign, who delights in life and inscribes us. There we have kotvenu, right? The Sefer Achen, there's the book of life, right? For your sake, God of life, right? Not sophisticated things, but we've included half the things from the list that we just saw. Now, these short additional prayers are often sung in services. So there's a short melody, and people will join in. Zochreinu l'chaim, melech hafetz v'chaim, and so on. There's multiple melodies as well. So, so that's the first one. The next one is on page 83. So this is the first line on the top of the page. Mi chamocha av harachamim. So who is like you, source of compassion? There's the word rachamim, compassion. Who remembers us, zocher, remembers us, with compassion, your creatures for life, right? So again, Mi chamocha av harachamim, zocher yitzurav l'chaim berachamim. Something like that. The next one, page 88. And, okay, this is a single word. So if you look 4 lines down from the top of the page, you can also look at my screen here at the closing bracha. So on what I have on my screen, if you look on the 4th line down in the Hebrew, beginning on the third word in, it says Baruch Atah Adonai. So blessed are you, Lord, HaMelech HaKadosh, the Holy King. Here it says the Holy Sovereign. When it's not the 10 days of repentance, it doesn't say HaMelech HaKadosh. It says Ha'el HaKadosh, which means the Holy God, right? So with the theme of kingship being one of the dominant themes of the season, instead of saying God, we replace God with king, right? A single word change, but it'll be changed for the next 10 days after Rosh Hashanah. 2 pages later on page 90. Towards the bottom of the page, this is the 5th line from the bottom of the page. It's in bold a little bit. Uchtov l'chaim tovim kol b'nei vritecha. And inscribe all the people of your covenant for a good life, right? None of this stuff is sophisticated, right? Just short snippets capturing some of the themes. And it's in bold. What would happen if we were in person together davening and we were doing a repetition of the Amidah, typically the person leading services would pause right in front of each of these passages. The congregation would say the passage, and then the leader would then repeat it afterwards, possibly singing it if there's a melody for it. And then finally on page 91, this is the last Hebrew on the page, the Sefer Chaim, in the book of life, right? So how do we translate it here? May we and the entire house of Israel be called to mind and inscribed for life, blessing, sustenance, and peace in the book of life. And then look at the final bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem, Oseh HaShalom, right? Blessed are you, Lord, maker of peace, the one who makes peace. This also is not the normal bracha. During the rest of the year, it's, praise are you, Lord, HaMavarech et Amo Yisrael Bashalom, the one who blesses his people Israel in peace. So here for the High Holiday Liturgy, we condense it, and instead of having all these extra words, we just say it very directly and simply, Oseh HaShalom. God is the maker of peace.
Excuse me, Rabbi.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Would you, okay, 91, right?
That's on 91, yeah.
Okay, and where are we starting from that?
That's on the bottom of the page. The last 4 lines of Hebrew on the
page.
page.
Sefer Chaim?
The Sefer Chaim, yeah.
Oh, okay, so that's where we are. Okay,
that's what we're talking about, right? So these are the 5 editions on beginning Rosh Hashanah up through Yom Kippur in every Amidah 3 times a day, right? Every Amidah is going to have these. And in our Shabbat Siddur, in our weekday Siddur, you're going to see these included, usually maybe indented a little bit or a little bit smaller writing. And there will be instructions right above it in English saying during the 10 days of repentance, recite this. All right, now let's talk about piyut. Piyut means liturgical poetry. A lot of our prayers, especially on the high holidays, are what we would call piyut. A person who writes a piyut is called a paitan. The tradition of writing this liturgical poetry began in the early Middle Ages in the land of Israel and spread and spread to Babylonia, it spread to Spain, it all spread to Eastern Europe, Central Europe, all over the place. And this was a way for poets, inspired artists to be able to use their art to expound on the holiness of the day. And so they did this on Shabbat, so some like El Adon, that's a piyut that made its way into our Shabbat liturgy. All of the holidays have piyutim that are written specifically for those holidays. And the high holidays especially have lots and lots of piyutim. So many piyutim. Now the poetic style, so sometimes it follows a biblical style. When Jews started to come under the influence of Arabic poetry and Arabic language, it started to pick up some of those styles, the styles of Arabic poetry, both in terms of rhyme and in meter. Often, as we're going to see, a piyut will spell out words, or it'll be an acrostic, or sometimes a very sophisticated, complicated acrostic. And especially as you're getting into kind of the Arabic lands, these piyutim got really, really complicated, right? Just like high poetry today is hard. Like, it's hard. You can't read a poem and just understand it right away. You got to really think the language is so important. The rhyme, the meter is so important, and it goes over the heads of most of us, right? You need to hear it over again. You need to read it. And that was true then as it is now, right? So in terms of like, who was the audience for these paitanim? Well, I think a lot of it was each other, right? So the sense of like we're trying to impress each other with our use of alliteration, the kind of creative citation of the biblical phrase in some sort of creative way. And I think it probably went over the head of most people who are hearing it. A Paitan might write a new poem every single week for Shabbat services and introduce it to the community. And they probably groaned every time he got up there and to sing it. But some of them became really popular and were beloved. And they gradually started to enter into the liturgy. But remember, this is all taking place before there is an anthology yet of all of these prayers. And so I would imagine that it's written on a piece of paper, a piece of parchment, and they bring it out at the right time. Maybe a service leader would memorize it, but it's not hard. Our Mahzor is big. It's a lot to memorize. I mean, even if you're in an era when memorization is a much more common technique, it's still a lot of material, and without a lot of written materials available. So it's quite possible that there were collections, books of piyutim that kind of came together, maybe by a particular author. Some of the famous Paitanim, the earliest is Yossi ben Yossi, right? Yossi, the son of Yossi. Parents weren't very creative, I guess. He lived back in the 4th century, really early, and we just have fragments of his writings. Yanai is probably the most, not Yanni, Yanai, the most prolific of all of the Paitanim. He's probably active in the 6th century, Common Era. And then his student was Elazar ben Yaakov Kalir, known as just Kalir. He was a student of Yanai, active in the 6th and 7th century. And then there's lots of poets that follow. You've heard of Ibn Ezra, Abraham Ibn Ezra. He wrote a lot of poetry. I had to take a whole semester-long class on Ibn Gabirol, a Spanish poet, the 12th century, a court poet, and lots of others. The piyutim were controversial, if you could believe it. Some people liked them a lot. Some people hated them, right? Why did they hate them? So one reason was that some people felt that it distracted from the themes of the service, which were actually necessary, right? So there is a set of prayers that have to be recited in a particular way, and if we're throwing in all this extra stuff, it distracts from it, right? This is supplemental, and I'll just use an analogy, just like kitniot on Pesach serves as a distraction from the actual prohibition, which is chametz, right? So if there's all these piyutim, maybe it distracts us from the ideal of what we're supposed to be focused on liturgically on the high holiday. So that was one reason. A second reason was that it made services really long. So I'm not making that up, by the way. It's, many piyutim were, as a result of that, maybe they entered into a tradition and then they got removed at some point. Some of the piyutim were shortened, right? So we see some piyutim, and we'll see this, where it's an alphabetical acrostic that ends after the 4th letter, right? At one time, it went all the way to Taf, right? But, for whatever, did it get lost? Maybe it got lost. Or maybe they decided they wanted to shorten it, and so they just shortened it, right? As I mentioned earlier, the Cairo Geniza is full of piyutim that did not become part of the liturgy. Maybe they weren't good enough. Maybe just, as things happen, they get lost. And maybe somebody accidentally threw it away. Lots of possibilities, lots of mysteries. All right, so let's look at the first. Now we're going to have to turn back to page 81. This is a short piyut that is called a reshut. Reshut means permission. It's one category of piyut, and it's where the person leading will ask for permission to pray. And usually it's something along the lines of the chazan or the shaliach tzibor, the person leading services, will say, "I'm not worthy, and yet here I am, the messenger of this community. standing before God, offering the prayers of all of these people. So despite my unworthiness, please accept my prayers. So this particular one, Misod Chachamim Unevonim, inspired really from the secret of the sages and the intelligent, and and the teachings of those who acquired wisdom, I open my lips in prayer, and so on. Right. So this is a reshut, the prayer leader asking for permission. This particular short piyut, it's a single sentence, appears in every single Amidah repetition on both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And it's quite possible that the controversy over piyutim, whether or not they should be included or not, that this is actually addressing that controversy, right? Because what does he say? The first word is misod, from the secret, right? The secret knowledge or wisdom of the chachamim, the sages, right? That's an allusion to the rabbis of the Talmud, unevonim, and the intelligent ones, right? Milemedat, from those who have taught knowledge, right? I'm going to open my mouth in prayer, right? So all of these piyutim that I'm about to add to our service have the official seal of approval of the sages. May their memories be a blessing. Therefore, it is kosher to do what I'm about to do, right? So clearly those who advocated for piyutim won the debate, and now we have lots of piyutim in our liturgy. Our Mahzor, as I mentioned, has definitely condensed and done some both removal and abbreviation of some of the piyutim. So there's a series of 3 piyutim that appear early in the Amidah on Rosh Hashanah. These would not be part of the silent Amidah. They are part of the repetition of the Amidah. In our case, we're doing kind of a hybrid of the silent and the repetition. So we are going to be doing these. So this is the first of 3 that appear. And let's see if we can figure out some things about this one. It's page 83. This is an early one. This is written by Kalir, right? So he's 6th to 7th century. If you look at this piyut, right underneath the red aleph, we have Ata Hu Eloheinu, first letter, aleph. Bashamayim Uva'aretz, first letter, bet. And moving on, Gibur V'na'aratz, gimel. Next line, Dagul, dalet. Hey, this is an alphabetical acrostic. It is not a complicated one, right? 2 or 3 words only per phrase. The alphabet, first of all, we've got psalms that are alphabetical. Think of Ashrei, which is alphabetical. So there's biblical precedent for doing this way. It also makes it easier to memorize, to have something that's alphabetical. This has a lot of standard themes, praising God, expressing the really God's power. This is in a part of the service. We've just finished the Gvurot, which is the second section of the Amidah, which is an expression of God's power. We're now leading up to the Kedusha, the proclamation of God's holiness. And so we've got here kind of a lot of standard types of praises of God in alphabetical order. And some of these are kind of little citations from biblical passages. Now, we can pay attention as well in our Mahzor to the red parts. As we can see here, they give us some instructions for how to recite these prayers. So here it says, many congregations recite this piyut responsively, not responsibly, although hopefully responsibly as well. And then also for the ones that tend to be done out loud, the red is often the color of transliteration. So we can see that with this one as well. The way that we do this one is the prayer leader would recite the right column in the Hebrew, in the transliteration with the left column, and then the congregation would respond with the next little phrase. And so it just kind of goes back and forth as a call and response between the leader and the congregation. right, let's turn to the next page, 84. This is the second of the three piyutim. This one's a lot more sophisticated. This is from the 11th century, written by Shimon ben Yitzchak ben Abun of Mainz. So from Ashkenaz, Central Europe, the Rhine Valley, 11th century. When we get to the Kedusha, what's the big line in the Kedusha? Kadosh, 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 Hashem Tzva'ot, right? So holy, 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 right? Isaiah's vision of the angels in the heavenly throne room rising up and proclaiming God's holiness, saying it 3 times, right? So the number 3 is very prominent in this particular psalm. So what do we see? Just look at the structure of this psalm. There's 3 lines per stanza. At the end of each line, there's a little refrain. Adonai Melech, next one, Adonai Malach, the third one, Adonai Yimloch. So God, Melech is king, Adonai Malach, God was king, Adonai Yimloch, God will be king, right? So we go present, past, and future, right? So, and then it gets, after these 3 lines are completed, then we repeat those 3 and put them all together, right? So we've got a 3-line stanza, the past, the present, past, and future declaration of God's kingness, and then the repeat of those 3 expressions of God's kingness, right? Lots and lots of 3s, and that is picking up on just the structure of the Kedusha, which is coming up. Now, in addition, what is going on in each stanza? We've got 3 lines. The first of those 3 lines is an expression of the angels who are proclaiming God's, doing something to proclaim God's holiness. The second line is humans, right, doing it. And the third line is those on high and those below doing it, right? So the angels and the humans come together in praising God's name. And every single stanza follows that basic structure. We'll just look at the first one. All those who dwell on high, those are the angels, announce God's glory. All those who dwell on earth offer blessings. That's us down here. Those above and those below raise up their voices exalting God. We join with the angels and proclaim God's holiness. All right, but we are not done. Let's look at the first stanza. We're going to first go in 4 words in, right? The second half of the line. Be'omer ma'adirin. Now we're going to look at the second letter of those 2 words. What is that second letter? It's an aleph. Go on to the next line. Second letter of those 2 words, a bet. Next line, gimel. Next line, dalet, hey, vav, zayin, chet, tet. What happened? What happened is our Mahzor only includes 5 of the 12 stanzas of the song. So we cut off the rest of the aleph bet. Why did we do it? Because we don't want services to be too long, right? Now, but we're not done, right? What else is going on? Look at the first part of the stanza. Kol shin'ane shachak, kol shochne sheket, right? We got a shin. Go on to the next one. Kol malache mala, kol moshle mata. What do we got? We got mem. Next one. Kol aritze elyonin, kol ovre olamin. We have an ayin, right? Shin, mem, ayin. But then, as we just saw, we cut off. We skipped to the end of the piyut. But what's coming next on the next stanzas that we left? Well, the next stanza would have been a vav, and the one after that would have been a nun. And that spells Shimon, which is the first name of the composer of this piyut, right? So there are a lot of patterns that appear in this. I think this is a fairly sophisticated set of patterns. First of all, it makes it interesting for the Paitan. It's a way of showing off. He puts a signature in it, but it makes it a bit more memorable, right? It's easier to memorize it. By the way, we're not going to study it right now, but Lecha Dodi is full of this kind of stuff, right? Lecha Dodi is written in the 16th century, spells out lots of things, lots of hidden messages in, both through the stanzas, through the chorus. This is a well-established tradition. All right. Oh, and how do we chant this in synagogue? The prayer leader does each line of the stanzas. The congregation repeats the kind of the ending refrain of that line, and then when we get to the chorus, we kind of all join in together. All right, let's go on to the next one, page 85. And by the way, these piyutim are included in this Mahzor for Yom Kippur as well, so we get to hear them twice. This is called La'el Orech Din, to God, the arbiter of justice, right? And Orech Din in modern Hebrew is a lawyer. So God's a lawyer. So again, we have an alphabetical acrostic, right? Look at El, Aleph. Then we have the Bochen Levavot, we got Bet. Legola Amukot, we got a Gimel. Ledover Meshurim, a Dalet, and so on. So not a super complicated pattern here, but look at the end of each little phrase. So we've got in the first column, Biyom Din, which means on the day of judgment. And on the second column, it says Badin, which means in judgment. And certainly, as Rosh Hashanah is Yom Hadin, it is the day of judgment. So those are certainly important themes here. This was, this was written, this is attributed to Kalir, also one of the early classic poets. It cites a number of biblical passages. So in looking for something for the Letzofen Istarot, the seeker of hidden things, right? So we're looking for passages from the Bible that meet the right letter that we need. And so the way that we chant this one in, I'm looking at the wrong page here. All right, so this is describing God as first of all, as a judge, and God's qualities as a judge. And as is, often the case, we like to emphasize not God's qualities of justice as a judge, but God's qualities of mercy as a judge. And so this piyut expresses a lot of that. And by the way, this is not a new theme. This is a core biblical theme. Think about Abraham. When God comes to Abraham with the plan to wipe out Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham's response is "Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat," right? So shall the judge of all the earth not act justly, right? So Abraham is arguing for compassion, right? For mercy, and that mercy and that justice itself demands mercy. So we're in good company. I'll mention here that our Mahzor is designed with lots of commentary. On the right side of the page, it has commentary on the text. So on the liturgy, on the words of the prayers. On the left side of the page, it has poetry, a lot of modern stuff, and it'll have kind of theological statements, some kind of little prose essays, and every single page of the Mahzor includes material like that. So if you ever get bored, there's lots of things that you can do. Okay, we're done with piyutim. We're not doing the Kedusha this year because we're not together in person. So we're going to skip to page 87. These prayers also are in every single Amidah for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, both silent and repetition. And they all begin with the word uvechein, right? It's three paragraphs essentially that begin with the word uvechein. Uvechein means and therefore, right? So this comes right after the Kedusha has been done, but before we get to the final blessing that ends the Kedusha, right? That final blessing, we saw it earlier, that's the one that ends Hamelech HaKadosh, the Holy King. right? So this is before we get to that point. So, and therefore. So what we get here is 3 paragraphs in prose, and they cover a sequence of themes. The first of them focuses on all of creation, right? Just look at the first few words. Adonai our God, instill your awe in all you have made and fear of you in all you have created, right? This is a universal focus. The next one, bestow honor to your people, Adonai, praise to those who revere you. This is specifically to Israel, to the Jewish people. And this is more of a national type of focus, right? Joy to your land, gladness to your city. The third one, the righteous, beholding this will rejoice. The upright will be glad. The pious will celebrate with song. So this is more of a religious focus. This is specifically for, the holy people, the most pious, the most learned, the prophets among the people. And so we have this kind of sequence of 3 themes. And this, this is typically chanted out loud by the prayer leader. That one little line that you see in red is like, they tend to burst out into song. With Simcha la'artzecha v'sason le'irecha, joy to your land and happiness, rejoicing for your city, right? Simcha la'artzecha v'sason le'irecha. Short little melody, and then we continue with more chanting. All right, so we get to the end of the Amidah, and what do we get? We get Avinu Malkeinu. So this is on page 92. Avinu means our father. Malkeinu means our king, right? Definitely male words. No getting around it. What has our Mahzor done? We've translated Avinu Malkeinu. Whoops. Avinu Malkeinu. So now I don't have it on the slide, but if you turn the page on 93, you will see an alternative Avinu Malkeinu that was suggested. I think the editors had absolutely no expectation that any synagogue anywhere would ever actually use this, but they thought it was important to include. So what did they do is they turned it into an acrostic. The first line says Avinu Malkeinu, but then the next line says Boreinu Mivarchenu, right? Our creator, our blesser. Goalenu Mishmarenu, our redeemer, our guardian, right? Lots of other expressions describing God that are not so male, and these are all terms and expressions that appear elsewhere in the liturgy. So it's not so far-fetched to compose prayers. It's just that I think that Avinu Malkeinu is one of those iconic prayers that people know, and like, don't mess with my Avinu Malkeinu, right? So, but maybe if you want to use the other one, that's good. That's fine too. Avinu Malkeinu really is an old prayer. It's the oldest penitential prayer in our tradition. A penitential prayer is saying, I've sinned, please forgive me, right? Most of the penitential prayers appear in the Yom Kippur liturgy. We actually don't do so much of that in Rosh Hashanah. Avinu Malkeinu is an exception. It actually is not only recited on the high holidays, it's recited throughout the year on fast days. And the first record of it being recited goes back to the 2nd century in the Talmud, where Rabbi Akiva, responding to a drought, they declare a public fast, and then Rabbi Akiva gets up in front of the congregation and he declares, Avinu Malkeinu ein lanu melech ela ata, right? Our Father, our King, we have no king but thee. Our Father, our King, for thy sake have mercy upon us. Right? And then the legend records that his petition was answered, right? And so that began a tradition of Avinu Malkeinu. It was originally very short, and as things tend to happen, it got longer and longer and longer over the centuries. Our Mahzor has shortened it again, but a traditional Ashkenazi Mahzor is going to have 44 lines of Avinu Malkeinu. At one time, maybe it was alphabetical, but it got kind of messed up. And there actually are different versions of what makes up Avinu Malkeinu in different traditions. It is not recited when Rosh Hashanah is on Shabbat. There's a few theories about why. One is, since this was originally a prayer associated with fasting and asking for penitence, we're not allowed to fast on Shabbat, except for Yom Kippur. And therefore, if this is a fasting prayer, we wouldn't want to recite it on Rosh Hashanah. Another possibility is simply that it's asking for things, and that's not something, we don't ask for penitence on Shabbat, and so it gets removed for that reason. Finally, it has some ideas, some words and themes that maybe are more associated with weekdays. So for whatever reason, we don't do it on Shabbat. So this year we're going to only do Avinu Malkeinu on Sunday, but we'll also do it on Yom Kippur. You can see that there's an indented section about halfway down with a little red arrow next to it. These are traditionally the leader would recite it, and then the congregation would repeat each line after the reader. This year, I think we're not going to do that in the interests of time. But one thing I do want to point out, it says we get about right. Do you see my arrow? Okay. Okay. So right there, it says Avinu Malkeinu kotvenu b'sefer chaim tovim. Avinu Malkeinu, write us in the book of good life. So that language is specific to the high holidays. Other times of the year when Avinu Malkeinu is said, it doesn't say kotvenu b'sefer, it says zochrenu, remember us, right? The theme of writing in the book is a Rosh Hashanah theme specifically. So we say, remember us for good life. Remember us for redemption and salvation, right? On Rosh Hashanah, we say, write us. Now, in Yom Kippur, we also say, write us until the final service of Yom Kippur, Ne'ilah, when the word writing, all of the kotvenus, all the write us, inscribe us, change to chotmenus, which means seal us, right? The writing's done. Now, since we've been given a good decree, we want you to put the final stamp of approval on it, right? No more writing. Now, we finally get to the very end, the last line of Avinu Malkeinu. Avinu Malkeinu chonenu va'anenu ki ein banu ma'asim asei manu tzedakah v'chesed v'hoshienu, right? This is what we sing. Avinu Malkeinu, right? Probably the most recognizable melody of all of the high holidays. What does it mean? Our Father, our King, have compassion on us and answer us, for there are no deeds in us. So we're saying we're not worthy, right? We are imperfect. If we were to get exactly what we deserved, we wouldn't be able to stand, right? So what are we doing? We're asking you to deal with us in righteousness and love, and to save us. These are certainly themes we've seen, but the idea of find it in yourself, God, to have compassion for us, right? You can see the penitential nature of these words, and so I guess it kind of makes sense that we wouldn't do it on Shabbat. Okay, we're done with Shacharit. The Torah service is the Torah service. We've got some special readings for Shabbat and for Rosh Hashanah and Haftarah, but we do that all year long. So we're going to skip to Musaf, right? All right. Okay. Oh, actually, that's not ready to go there yet. All right, Musaf. We are going to see three major themes that will appear in Musaf. So one is Malchuyot, Melech, king. Malchuyot is kingships, literally. Expressions of God as the ruler and creator of the universe. Zichronot, remembrances. We're either asking for God to remember us for good things, or reminding God of good things that God has done for us in the past. The third one is shofarot, shofar blasts. So these three themes are the central themes of Musaf on Rosh Hashanah. We'll get to the way that they manifest themselves directly in the Mahzor. But first, we've got to go to Unetana Tokef. This is the most terrifying prayer of the high holidays. Terrifying in an awe-inspiring, awful in the full sense of the word. So it's on page 143. It's also on Yom Kippur. Unatana Tokef is, let us speak of the power of Kedushat Hayom, of the holiness of the day. This prayer, this piyut, kind of an extended piyut, is first mentioned in the 13th century, and it's part of the Ashkenazi tradition. It became so beloved that it even got included in some Sephardi traditions, although it's not a part of the traditional Sephardi liturgy. There's kind of a grisly story that is told in the 13th century about its composition, about a Rabbi Amnon of Mainz, who was kind of forcibly converted to Christianity and felt so terrible about it. Afterwards, he recanted, and then the Christian authorities got him, and then they basically tortured him to death and cut off all his arms and legs. And he felt that he deserved it because he had given up his faith. And then he shows up in synagogue on Rosh Hashanah. I'm not sure if it was Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. And right before the prayer leader got to the Kedusha, he stopped him and he recited Unatana Tokef. And as soon as he was done, he died. Right? So this is the story recorded in the 13th century. And then three days later, somebody has a big vision where this guy comes and talks to him and tells this really fantastic story about being by the river Sambatyon. And anyway, it's pretty wild. We'll talk about that another time. But most likely the prayer is actually older than that. But that's the first time it was mentioned. It's a grisly story, but it does reflect some of the awesomeness of what this prayer is expressing. The first paragraph imagines a courtroom, a divine courtroom in which God is the judge, the prosecutor, the expert, the witness, every single role, and God is remembering all of the forgotten things. So kol hanishkachot, everything that was forgotten. God opens up the book of remembrance. The book reads from itself, and what does it read? It reads our actions, our deeds, because our deeds have signed the page, have sealed the page, right? It's this really strange courtroom image. But the idea is that our actions, whether we remember them or not, are recorded and are remembered and are present themselves before God in this courtroom scene. That's the first paragraph. The second paragraph, Uveshofar gadol, the great shofar sounds, the kol d'mamad dakai shema, the thin murmuring sound can be heard. The angels are there, and then the scene shifts where all of creation starts parading before God as sheep, where God is the shepherd, and God counts each one and issues the decree for the coming year. What I always have noticed is that nowhere is there a direct causal connection made between the judgment, between what is read from the book and the decree that is made for each of us in the year, which I find very interesting, especially when we get to the next paragraph, Rosh Hashanah yikatevun uv'yom tzom kippur yichatemun. On Rosh Hashanah it is written, and on the fast of Yom Kippur it is sealed, right? So what is it that is sealed? It's the what could happen to us, or what will happen to us in the coming year, right? The first line, Kama yavrun v'chama yibarein. How many will pass on? How many will be created? Who will live? Who will die by fire? Who by water? Who will become impoverished? Who will be rich? Who will be cast down? Who will be raised up? Right. So this is a list, a powerful list of what could happen to us. And what I find so moving in all of this is that it also doesn't say that we learn what the decree is, right? So we've got these three elements, one after the other. There is some sort of judgment that is made. There is a decree that is given, and then that decree could be for good or for bad. And these three things are never directly connected to each other in the words of the liturgy. And to me, that just reflects I just think a very kind of powerful existential reality that good and evil are not necessarily directly rewarded in a way that we can see or understand. We don't know what's happening in the year ahead. 1 year ago, who could have guessed that we'd be having the kind of year that we're having, right? But when we said this, we were talking, who by plague, right? Who by fire, right? That's in the language here, and it has a particular resonance this year. And there's no sense of justice and right and wrong in who gets afflicted. Now, if you do want to make a connection, that there's a causal connection between these three things, right? There's a judgment, there's a sentence, and here's the sentence, and they're all related to each other. So I would refer to that as Santa Claus theology, right? He's making a list, he's checking it twice, he's gonna find out who's been naughty and nice, right? That's what that theology would be. But that just seems so overly simplistic and so not a reflection of what our experience in life tends to be. So there's this real sense of a ringing bell of fate that's there, and we just don't know what it's going to be. I thought there's some reactions. Does anybody have any questions or comments or reactions to this? Here, Sherry, you look like you're trying to unmute yourself.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've always had a problem with that because, how much of it is ill-fated, how much of it is good fate, how much of it is luck, how much do we sit back and not worry about the future because God has already decided for us. Mm-hmm. And it just takes away so much personal responsibility and empowerment.
Very disempowering.
To be better, in the coming year. So I do have a real problem with that. But I like what you said about how, some of the language that was used in the past, how prevalent or relevant it is for everything that's happened this year. There's fire, there's smoke, there's disease, there's plague, there's all of those things. So,
yeah. But the prayer's not done.
Okay.
So, this is I think such an incredibly theological prayer. The next page provides the response, I think, right? In the very first line. By the way, this is recited, this is like the cantor's biggest moment. These two pages, the ark is open, everybody stands up. This is the grandest part of the service. The congregation then shouts out in response, U'teshuva, u'tefila, u'tzedaka, ma'avirin et roa hagzera. Right, teshuva, right, repentance, tefila, prayer, u'tzedaka. Is it righteousness? Is it actual charity? It might be charity, actually, in this case. Ma'avirin, which is to push aside or cause to pass over. Roa hagzera. Now, you will often see this translated as the evil decree, right? In other words, whatever we just read about happening in the previous paragraph, that the decree that's waiting for us, we can change it by these three things, right? But that's not what Roa Hagzera means. Roa Hagzera means the evil of the decree, or better, the severity of the decree. And so the idea is that there may be something in store for us but we in fact are empowered. We can do something, whatever that thing might be. And so this is a call for really piety, right? It's for right, repentance, trying to return, trying to be better. Tefillah, worship, and tzedakah, and justice, righteousness, right? That's how we respond to tragedy that may come. Lisa, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to add at the Slichot mega study night the other night, there was someone who was going through the different contexts of the word to pass in this entire prayer. Hopefully it's been recorded and someone, people can go back and
yeah, because the word appeared on the
listen to it, because he had like, twice.
It occurred, it's the very first word of this kama ya'arun, the kama yibare, how many will pass?
Yeah.
There it's almost says like will pass away. And then here we have ma'avirin, which is will cause to pass.
Right. And so he talks about like the 6 or 7 versions of this word and the context, and then relates it to other biblical texts, and noting that there's slight, subtle little differences that imply a certain both disempowerment and empowerment on both sides. So for example, so the prayer, charity, and repentance allow passing the Tarsh decree being the more empowering one, whereas a version where the line where he's talking about the sheep pass being not unlike the taking of dedication to the temple, which is it's every 10th sheep, and there's nothing you can do to change it. It's every 10th, no substitutions allowed, and it's this very rigid, very cast the die and fall what may kind of view of the future. So very fascinating to see these two playing together.
Yeah, but this prayer is just, I think, just altogether just expressing like how powerless we are just in the face of the great universe. And then it goes on. The next part of this prayer picks up on a lot of biblical liturgy, and I'll just point to the one that we sing in shul. Adam Yesod a person's source is from the dust, and his end is to the dust. Right? Start from the dust, we end the dust, and then we just have lots of, we're like a dry piece of grass, right? So it's just saying that life is ephemeral, right? And so it's then up to us to make it meaningful, right? And a life can be just like a passing shadow, but it doesn't have to be, right? I think that line of Teshuvah Tefillah Tzedakah echoes through the rest of the prayer.
That phrase, we'll see how the dust settles. Again, that ephemeral kind of idea, but that it's all passive. We don't settle the dust settles upon us, which actually has been less figurative in the last 2 weeks than ever before. Yeah. But it's, I don't know.
I want to point to the end of this prayer where it says, Ein kitzba lishnotecha. Your years never end. Your time has no measure. The extent of your glory can never be imagined. For there's no understanding of the mystery of your nature, right? We're an ultimate expression of we cannot understand you, God, right? You are eternal. We are finite and mortal, and there's nothing that we can really understand about you. Or maybe, if you will, we are so small in a vast, mysterious universe. It's an expression of that. So then we're left with the question of what we're going to do about it. So, and I think that ultimately for me, that's what living a life of faith is that knowing all of that, I'm still going to live a life of meaning. And I'm still going to choose to, to be driven by teshuvah, tefillah, and tzedakah in my life. Okay, so that was the time it took us. Jump ahead. 153. This is now going to introduce what is actually the most important part of the Musaf service, which is those three themes of Malchuyot, Zichronot, Shofarot. By the way, I'll just, one final thing about Unetana Tokef. The first paragraph of Unetana Tokef about the book of remembrance. God remembers all of the forgotten things. We've got, we started with a theme of God as the king and the judge. Then we go to God remembering all of these things. And the second paragraph, Uva Shofar Gadol, with a great shofar. So we actually pick up on some of these, on those three themes, which then are the main section after the Kedusha. So on 153, as an introduction to the three sections, we get two prayers that are reshuyot, the reshutz. We saw earlier with Misod Chachamim, where the prayer leader asks for permission to pray, to represent these people. Now we get two more. The first one in the middle of 153 is Heyeh im pifiot shluchem amcha beit Yisrael. This is for the congregation to recite, right? The congregation or a representative of the congregation. Usually when we're in person, I get up and I lead us saying these words together. And so look what it says. We're asking God, be with the mouths of the messengers of your people, the house of Israel. And I love this because here you have a congregation with their representative up in front of them. And they're saying there are lots of congregations just like this all over the world that are doing the exact same thing that we're doing right now. And we're asking you to think about our prayer leader right here, along with all of them, right? They're almost like there's a team. So there's this really powerful statement of Jewish unity. I think that we're all celebrating this holiday together. We're all imperfect, and yet we're all here trying to stand before our Creator. So this is the congregation's prayer. And then the response, Ochila La'el, this is for the prayer leader to respond. And this is that person's reshut, that person's appeal to be able to represent. And this is first mentioned in the 14th century, although it's probably older than that. Essentially, the prayer leader says, I want to do a good job. Please give me the right words to say and let me express them effectively. And then this introduces those three sections. Now, the three sections are going to be comprised, the central part is 10 verses on the theme, right? So the first one is Malchuyot, kingship. So we're going to have 10 verses from the Bible about God's kingship. This is discussed in the Talmud. The rabbis all agree that there needs to be verses recited. They need to be from the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. They just disagree over how many there need to be. So one opinion says there need to be 3 verses total. One says there need to be 7 verses total. And one says there need to be 10 verses total. Can you guess which one won? 10 verses.
I was going to say that.
10 verses. But if you're in a pinch, you can do 3. So we're not going to go over all the verses, but there's a common structure to each of these 3 sections. So we'll look at, we talked about that. So we'll look at the first one, so Malchuyot. So Malchuyot, this should be familiar to us. Aleinu, right? This is what Aleinu is for. Aleinu was written to be recited once a year on Rosh Hashanah. This is one of the oldest non-biblical prayers we have. It was recited during Second Temple times. It was a declaration by Israel that we have a special obligation to worship Yud He Vav He, the one God, despite all those pagan nations around, right? All right. Judaism was the only monotheistic religion at the time, and so it kind of disses all the idolatrous nations that were in the world. This was recited just once a year, and it was recited here in the kingship part of the liturgy. So this is when the custom is for people to do a full prostration. Originally, this was a regular practice in temple times. It went out of favor. Probably looked something like what Muslims do in their worship, but Aleinu is something that people still go down all the way down on their knees for. Va'anachnu korim, you can see the little twirly symbol. We bend our knees and we bow down and give thanks before you, the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He. And so this is a piyut that serves as the introduction to Malchuyot, to this section of the service. It's all about God's kingship. God is the sole creator of the universe. Okay, let's go on to the next page. 156. So you can see the Al-Kain prayer. Al-Kain is probably a later composition, but it talks about that if Aleinu is this particular specific prayer that talks about Israel's obligation to worship God, Al-Kain is the universal. It's saying eventually there's going to be a time when all peoples will acknowledge the one God, and at that time God's name will be one. That gets
so what's the story about the meditation in between those, though?
Oh, yeah, that just got added by the editors of this Mahzor. They took a piyut and they threw it in here. I'm not sure that this is, we're not going to be doing it. That's why I wasn't focusing on it. But it's a piyut that's on the theme of kingship, right? You can see the first word of every line is Melech Elyon, exalted king. It's an acrostic of some sort, although it looks like we've taken out a lot of the verses in the interest of time. So back on 156, I did want to show just how the verses appear. We're not going to read all the verses, but you can see in the middle section, it says, Kakatuv b'Toratecha, it is written in your Torah, and then Aleph Bet Gimel. Conveniently, our Mahzor has numbered them for us. We get 3 verses from the Torah. Next, Uvdivrei Kodshecha Katuv Lemor, and in your holy writings or your holy words, it is written, saying. So this is from the writings. The translation here is from Psalms because these 3 happen to be from Psalms. So Psalms is from the writings. So Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, Torah, prophets, writings. So we've gone a little bit out of order. Torah and then writings. And then on the next page, we finish it up. Ve'al yedei avadecha hanevi'im katuv lemor. And through your servants, the prophets, it is written saying, and then we get 3 verses from the prophets. We're up to 9. We need a 10th verse. So that's going to come right here. Uvtoratcha katuv lemor. In your Torah it is written. What is our final verse? Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. No mention of king there. So the Talmud discusses what the appropriate 10th verse. The 10th verse is always a final verse back from Torah, right? So 3 Torah, 3 writings, 3 prophets, and then a 10th from the Torah. So as the rabbis understand this line of the Shema is that it's giving testimony of Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim, of the acceptance of the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, right? We are saying there is one God, and God is the creator, and I owe my allegiance to God as king, specifically as king. And so while king is not mentioned explicitly in this verse, it's implied, at least by way of the rabbinic interpretation of this verse. All of the other verses use some form of king in them, of melech in them, and I think our Mahzor puts every mention of that in bold to help us see it. Then we get a little bit of prose prayer, kind of generic expansion on the theme, and then a final concluding bracha, a blessing here at the end. Here, what is it? Baruch atah Hashem. We sing it. Melech hakol haaretz mekadesh Yisrael. That's one. V'yom hazikaron. Right. Blessed are you, Lord, Melech hakol haaretz, King over all the earth, mekadesh Yisrael, who sanctifies Israel, v'yom hazikaron, and the day of remembrance. And that finishes Malchuyot. We go on to Zichronot, remembrances. It follows the exact same pattern. There's an opening piyut, 10 verses, a little bit of prose, 10 verses, a little bit of prose, and then a concluding bracha. So what is the bracha here? It's in the kind of the third paragraph down on the slide, on the page as well. The last few words, Baruch atah Hashem, Zocher Habrit. God is the rememberer of the covenant. And every one of those 10 verses has the word Zocher appearing in it, remember, in some form or another, right? So, and we're trying to remind God that God remembered our ancestors in beneficent ways. While we're here, I want to just point out what appears at the bottom of this page. We see a little bit of shofar blasts, and then 2 more paragraphs. The shofar blasts are done by custom as a way to get to 100 blasts for the day. Right, so the tradition of Mea Kol, 100 blasts of the Torah. In order to get to 100, we need the shofar service, which is during the Torah service traditionally. We need all of the blasts during the silent Amidah. We need all of the blasts during the repetition of the Amidah. And there's a final set of blasts in the last Kaddish at the end of services. So lots of blasts. We don't do it on Shabbat. We don't blow shofar on Shabbat. But on when it's a weekday, we do blow shofar. We're not going to be able to blow shofar this year during our services, but there is this prayer here, Hayom Harat Olam. Harat means to what has it translated? Today the world stands as at birth.
What page are you on?
This is a 162, the second to last paragraph. Harat is like herayon, which is pregnancy, right? Or conception, right? The sense of becoming pregnant, right? Today is the conception of the world. Which is kind of interesting imagery. We're connecting creation with judgment and parenthood. We're saying, have mercy on us. Whether you're going to see us as servants or children, if children, rachamein, have mercy on us like a father on his children, right? Or let's say on a parent on his or her children, right? So we kind of are combining a lot of different things. This paragraph appears at the end of all 3 of the services, exactly the same. And then when we blow shofar, there's Areshet Sifatenu, kind of also as a summation. May the words of our lips be pleasing to you, exalted God. And then it ends, T'kabel b'rachamim ratzon seder zichronotenu, right? Receive in mercy and in acceptance, seder zichronotenu, this order of zichronot. Right? So that final word changes at the end. Seder malchuyotenu, seder zichronotenu, seder shofrotenu, as to correspond with the correct service. Now the third section, shofarot. Same pattern exactly. I just want to look at the final bracha. Baruch atah Hashem, shomea kol truat amo Yisrael barachamim. Blessed are you, Lord, who hears the sound of the truah, of the shofar blasts of his people Israel with mercy. so that's the final bracha for shofarot, and then we end. So we've got the exact same structure for all three of these sections. But remember when we were talking earlier about the controversy over whether to have piyutim or not? The anti-piyut people were worried that throwing so many piyutim in would distract from the 10 verses, which in fact are essential parts of the service. All right, this is our very last prayer that we're gonna look at. Hayom, right? So here we end. You know, this is like the grandest melody. Hayom, 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 hayom. Lots of other motifs, lots of other melodies. Moti throws in a bunch of them typically. This originally, as you might guess, was an alphabetical acrostic. We have an aleph, a bet, a gimel, a dalet, and whoops, we forgot the rest of it. It might be that it actually got lost, that it wasn't intentional. Hayom means today, right? Today, strengthen us, bless us, exalt us, seek our well-being, right? Whereas this, in some ways, this is almost a penitential prayer, but we do it on Shabbat anyways, maybe because we like it so much, but it doesn't have the normal theme, like sound of penitential prayers, which tend to be kind of somber and down. Here it's joyous and rejoicing. Why is it so joyous? Probably because we know we're at the end and we get to eat honey cake soon. That's my guess. It's a final plea for God to have compassion upon us. And so that's what we do. And then you can see we get to the Oseh Shalom. This is the end of the Amidah right here. And that, if you can believe it, in what we do this coming weekend, this is everything that is going to be different than what we would do on a typical Shabbat morning. Like, we have covered it all, right? If you can believe that. So it's gonna follow a familiar structure, but I hope we've gotten a sense of what the major themes are, the way that they're expressed in the liturgy, the way that the liturgy in some senses tells a story, and that it contains theology, it contains a lot of it, emotion. It combines themes of helplessness and empowerment, and it recognizes that that we live in a world where there's a balance between justice and mercy. We know we need both, but we really want mercy. and I'll add just a final personal reflection that everything we say about God is really, we're really talking to ourselves, right? The qualities that we use both to describe God and that we ask for God to embody are we're really talking to ourselves. These are really the things that we think we need to be, right? We need to be more compassionate, right? We need to listen more, right? We need to take more responsibility for our earth and everything that's in it. And on the day that we celebrate the new year, these are wonderful things to be praying about and to be thinking about. So,
quick question.
yeah. Any questions? Yeah.
Are we going to Tashli?
Well, we're done for this session. 9:04. It took exactly an hour and a half. That was good. Actually, there is a Tashlich service in the home kit.
Oh, okay.
That was passed out along with instructions for how to do Tashlich.
Okay.
Right. We're not able to have a big Tashlich together. If you want to go with somebody and do Tashlich, socially distanced in small numbers, you could. You can do Tashlich anytime between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It does not have to be on Rosh Hashanah. It's traditionally done on the first Rosh Hashanah day that you can do that it can be done on. It can't be done on Shabbat, so normally we would do it on Sunday afternoon. So usually we do it together. This year we're not able to. But if you wanted to, you're near the shul to hear the shofar service. If you want to hop over to the Los Gatos Creek Trail and do Tashlich, you can do that. You can do that also. And
don't forget your crumbs.
Don't forget your crumbs. Yeah. Although you don't need crumbs. If you look at the instructions, you'll see that you don't actually have to be next to water. Ideally, you are next to water and you can throw your crumbs in. But if it's not safe, you shouldn't do it. If you can only see water from a distance, that's enough. And if you can't get to a body of water, you can turn the hose on. And that's not a joke.
Funny. It feels like one.
You just go in the shower and, you know, do your deal.
Well,
in
you
the
probably
shower.
shouldn't do it in the bathroom, but you could turn your sink faucet on.